Chapter 11. Unexpected Visitors. A soft tapping sound woke Bond from his restless sleep. It took him a moment to realize that the tapping noise was coming from behind the curtains. He quietly picked up his gun and crept along the wall to the edge of the curtains. He pulled them aside with one quick movement. The golden blonde hair was immediately visible in the moonlight through the half-open window. Mary Goodnight was looking at him through the glass. Bond breathed a sigh of relief. He put down his gun, carefully opened the window fully, and helped Goodnight to climb into the room. There was a bang as the window snapped shut, and they both froze. After a moment or two, he quietly guided her through the moonlit room and into the bathroom. After closing the door and turning on the taps to cover the sound of their conversation, he said firmly, "What on earth are you doing here, Mary?" Her voice was desperate. "I had to come. I had to find you somehow. I went to that bar, and the girl there told me where she thought you'd gone. I left the car in the trees at the bottom of the hotel drive and crept up here. I didn't know where you were, but then I saw the open window, and I just somehow knew that you would be the only one to sleep with your window open. So I took the chance." "What's happened?" asked Bond. "There's an urgent message from headquarters. They said it had to be given to you at all costs. They think you are in Havana, but they said that one of the KGB top men who goes by the name Hendricks is staying at this hotel. You must stay away from him. Apparently, one of his jobs is to find you and, kill you. So I put two and two together, and knowing you were in this corner of the island, I thought you might already be on his track, but that you might not know he was looking for you while you were looking for him, if that makes sense." There was a pause while Bond thought. Then he responded, "Yes, he's here, that's for sure. And so is a gunman called Scaramanga. You might as well know, Mary, that Scaramanga killed Ross in Trinidad." She put her hand to her mouth in shock. "And as for Hendricks," continued Bond, "he's here, all right, although I don't think he's identified me for certain. But don't worry, I think I can handle the situation. Besides, I've got help." He told her about Felix Leiter and Nicholson. "Now, we've got to get you out of here. Just tell headquarters that you've delivered the message, that I'm here, and that the two CIA men are here as well." With that, he gently put a hand on her shoulder, then turned off the taps and opened the bathroom door. As they stepped back into the room, a steady voice came from the darkness at the end of the bed.
"Step forward, both of you. Put your hands together behind your head."
Scaramanga walked to the door and turned the lights on. The golden gun remained pointing at Bond as he moved. Bond looked at him in disbelief. He looked towards the bedroom door. His case was there, as it had been the night before, with the glasses balanced on top. And Scaramanga could not possibly have got through the small window on his own. Then he saw that the wardrobe was open, and a light was shining through it from the room next door. It was the simplest of secret doors, just the hole of the back of the cupboard, and it would have been impossible for Bond to discover it while checking his room. Scaramanga stood looking at both of them.
"I didn't see this dancer on the stage tonight. Where has she come from?" he said accusingly.
"We're engaged to be married," stated Bond, thinking quickly. "She's a clerk at the British High Commissioner's office in Kingston, Her name's Mary Goodnight. She found out where I was staying from that bar where you and I met, and came out to tell me that my mother's in hospital in London. She's had a bad fall." Bond then challenged Scaramanga, adding a note of anger to his voice. "What's wrong with that? And what do you think you are doing, coming into my room in the middle of the night, waving a gun around?" After a pause, he dropped his hands to his sides and turned to the girl. "Put your hands down, Mary. Mr. Scaramanga must have thought there were burglars in here when he heard the window slam shut. Now, you'd better be going. You've got a long drive back to Kingston." Mary began to play her part in the story. "Gosh, yes, I'd better go," she said, as she picked up her small bag from the bed where she had dropped it. "I really mustn't be late into the office in the morning. I'm organising a big party for the Prime Minister, and it's tomorrow, so I've a lot to do. So, Mr. Scramble, I'm terribly sorry for waking you up." And she stepped forward between Bond and Scaramanga and offered him her hand to shake. But Scaramanga was not going to be taken in so easily.
"Stop there, lady. And you, mister, stay where you are."
Mary Goodnight let her hand fall to her side and looked at him questioningly, as though he had just refused a cup of tea. A second passed, yet it felt like an eternity, before Scaramanga conceded,
"Okay, I believe you. Put her through the window again."
He waved his gun at the girl.
"Okay, get moving, and don't come back."
Bond led Goodnight to the window and hurriedly helped to push her out. Then he moved away from the window and sat down on the bed with considerable relief. He could feel the hard shape of his gun under the pillow against his leg. Scaramanga had put his gun away and was leaning against the wall.
"The High Commissioner's office," he said, and paused. "That also houses the representative of your famous Secret Service, doesn't it? I wonder, Mr. Hazard, if your real name isn't James Bond. You were pretty quick with that gun tonight. I seem to have heard somewhere that this man Bond likes his guns. I also have information that he's somewhere in the Caribbean, and that he's looking for me. Quite a coincidence, don't you think?"
Bond laughed easily. "I thought they'd got rid of that Secret Service years ago. I am who I say I am. All you've got to do is call Mr. Tony Hugill, the boss up at Frome, and check on my story. And can you explain how this Bond man could possibly have tracked you down to a sleepy bar in Savannah-la-Mar? And what does he want from you, anyway?" Scaramanga watched him silently for a while, weighing up the evidence. Then he spoke in a serious tone.
"You just remember this, mister. If it turns out you're not who you say you are, I'll shoot you dead. Got it?"
There was silence, while the men looked at each other. Bond said nothing.
"No, you'd better get some sleep," said Scaramanga. "I've got a meeting at 10 o'clock in the conference room with Hendricks, and I don't want to be disturbed. After that, we're all going for a ride down to Green Island Harbor on that train I was telling you about. It'll be your job to make sure that the trip is well organized. Talk to the hotel manager first thing in the morning. All right?"
Scaramanga did not wait for an answer. He walked into the wardrobe, pushed Bond's suit to one side, and disappeared. Chapter 12. Bad News. The next morning, Bond arrived at the conference room a few minutes before 10 o'clock. The evidence of the day before was still there to be seen. The chairs were roughly in their correct positions, but the ashtrays had not been emptied. Bond looked for stains on the carpet, or for signs that the carpet had been washed, but there were none. Rotkopf had probably been killed by a single bullet through the heart. Bond tidied the room and then dutifully started to examine the windows and curtains. At that moment, in walked Scaramanga, followed by Hendricks. He said roughly,
"Okay, Mr. Hazard. Lock both doors like yesterday. No one comes in, right?"
"Yes," affirmed Bond, and he then went out and locked the door. Again he fetched a champagne glass and took up his position, listening through the door. Immediately Hendricks began talking, quickly and urgently. "Mr. S., I have bad troubles to report. I spoke with my people in Havana this morning. They have heard direct from Moscow. That man, the man outside this room right now, is the British secret agent James Bond. They have given me his description, and the scar down the right side of his face leaves no doubt. And his shooting last night." There was a pause, and then Hendricks spoke in a calmer, more threatening tone. "But how can this have happened? What a shocking mistake! If it weren't for the watchfulness of my superiors, who knows what damage this man might have done? I must give my superiors a full report. You must tell me exactly how this man ended up working for you in this way." There was silence. Bond imagined Scaramanga sitting back in his chair, looking directly into the eyes of Mr. Hendricks. The voice, when it came, was decisive and firm.
"Mr. Hendricks, thank you for this information and for your concern. However, tell your people this. I met this man completely by accident. At least I thought so at the time. So there is no point in worrying about how it has happened. It hasn't been easy to set up this conference so quickly, and I needed help. Someone to make things go smoothly. This guy seemed okay. But I'm not stupid. I knew that when this was all over I'd have to get rid of him, just in case he'd learned anything he shouldn't have. Now, you say he's a member of the Secret Service. What you've told me only changes one thing. He'll die today, instead of tomorrow. And here's how it's going to happen." Scaramanga lowered his voice. Now Bond could only hear a few words of what was being said. The sweat ran down his ear as he pressed it to the bottom of the champagne glass. "Old train trip. Rats in the sugar cane. Unfortunate accident. Before I do it, a big love."
There was a pause, and then Scaramanga went on in a louder voice.
"So you can relax. There'll be nothing left of the guy by this evening. Okay?"
Mr. Hendricks' voice was flat and uninterested. He had carried out his orders, and definite action was going to follow. "Yes, what you are saying will be satisfactory. I will watch with amusement. And now I want to talk about other business. The sabotage of the aluminium industry. My superiors want to know what the situation is."
"Yes," replied Scaramanga. "Everything is going to plan with the 3 aluminium-producing companies we agreed on. Reynolds Metal, Kaiser Bauxite, and Alumina of Jamaica. The barrels of explosives you gave me are pretty powerful, aren't they? We've already got most of them hidden away in their aluminium mines. they're certainly going to cause a lot of problems for the metal industry, and shake the economy here and in the United States.
Good. That is all, then, concluded Hendricks.
Okay, let's go and see if the others are ready to go out. It's 11:30, and the train is due to leave in an hour or so, explained Scaramanga.
Bond moved quickly away from the door and sat on a nearby chair. As Scaramanga unlocked the door and stepped into the room, Bond looked up and yawned. Mr. Scaramanga and Mr. Hendricks looked down at him with a look of only mild interest. It was as if Bond were a piece of steak, and they were wondering whether to have it cooked rare or medium rare. Chapter 13. The Train Trip. At 12 o'clock, the men all met in the hotel lobby, and Scaramanga, now wearing a large white Stetson cowboy hat and a white suit, announced the plans for the day.
Okay, guys, we're going to have a great time. First, we have to drive a couple of kilometers down the road to the station. We'll get aboard this amazing steam train. Then we're going to steam along this old train track through the sugarcane fields for about 30 kilometers until we get to Green Island Harbor. There are plenty of birds, rats, and crocodiles in the rivers. We might do a bit of hunting, have some fun with our guns. You've all got your guns with you? Fine, fine. Then we'll have lunch with some champagne at Green Island Harbor, and the music and girls will be there to keep us happy. After lunch, we can get aboard the Thunder Girl, a big, beautiful motorboat, and we'll go for a cruise and catch ourselves some big fish. Then back here for some drinks. All right? Everyone satisfied? Then let's go.
As they travelled in the cars to the station, Bond wondered what the plan was for his removal. It would happen during the hunting, he presumed, and smiled darkly to himself. Strangely, he was feeling happy. He would not have been able to explain the emotion, but it was a feeling of being tightly wound up, like a spring, ready to uncoil. After 6 weeks of following this man, today was the day he was going to win or lose. Scaramanga was just amusing himself and entertaining his friends, whereas Bond was fighting for his life. Surely that would give him the edge when the moment came. Thinking about all of this was beginning to make Bond feel tense. He took a deep breath, told himself to relax, and looked out of the window at the passing scenery. The steam train, called the Belle, was an impressive replica black and yellow engine. It stood in the station, shining brightly in the hot midday sun, with a thin line of black smoke curling up from its funnel. Behind the engine was a coal tender, and then there was one carriage, which was open-topped, and had several rows of bench seats. The brake van came last, and was also painted in black and yellow. It had just one large, golden-armed chair where the guard would normally sit to control the brake wheel of the train.
"All aboard!"
cried Scaramanga enthusiastically, and then he turned immediately to Bond.
"Now then, you climb up in the front with the driver."
Bond smiled happily. "Thanks. I've always wanted to do that since I was a child. What fun!" Scaramanga ignored the comment and turned to speak to the other men.
"You can all sit in the carriage. Mr. Hendricks, you sit in the first row of seats behind the coal tender, please. The rest of you sit behind him. I'll be at the back, in the brake van. It's a good place to hunt from. Okay?
Everybody took their seats. Moments later, the engine gave a triumphant toot, and the train pulled out of the station. It started to pick up speed as it moved along the track, which disappeared, as straight as an arrow, into the distance. Bond had studied in detail the map that Mary had given him, and he knew exactly the route that the train line took. First there would be 10 kilometres of cane fields, then came Middle River, followed by huge areas of swampland. Then would come Orange River, leading into Orange Bay, and then more sugar-cane and mixed forest, and small farms, until they came to Green Island Harbour. Now he looked around him, and paid careful attention to his immediate surroundings. Next to him stood the driver, who looked dirty and violent. He was shovelling coal into the engine, and seemed to have no interest in Bond whatsoever. Bond said, "My name's Mark Hazard. What's yours?" The man simply stared at Bond in a way which made it very clear that he did not want to talk. Bond looked back over the low coal tender to the carriage behind. He gave a cheery wave to the men and shouted, "Great fun!" They all stared back at him, but not one of them responded to his comment. So, thought Bond, they had been told that he was a spy among them, and that he would be killed today. It was an uncomfortable feeling, having those 10 enemy eyes watching him like 10 gun barrels. He rested his hand against his gun, then on the 3 spare magazines of ammunition he carried in his pocket, and felt reassured. About 100 metres ahead, a large bird rose up from beside the track, and, after a few heavy flaps, caught the wind and moved up and away. There came the boom of Scaramanga's gun. A single feather came floating down from the wing of the bird. A second shot was fired. The bird gave a sudden jerk, and then began to fall untidily out of the sky before crashing into the sugar-cane. There were shouts of joy from the carriage. Bond leant out of the carriage and shouted, "That'll cost you £5. That's the fine for killing a John Crow." A shot whistled past Bond's head. Scaramanga laughed.
"Sorry, I thought I saw a rat."
Then another shot rang out as Bond jumped down out of sight, and the other men began to laugh.
"Watch what you're saying, man," Scaramanga shouted to Bond, "or I really will shut you up."
Beside Bond, the driver swore, and then sounded the train's whistle. Bond looked down the line. Far ahead, there was something lying across the rails of the track. With the train still whistling, the driver pulled back hard on the accelerator lever. The train began to slow down, but then Scaramanga fired 2 shots into the air and yelled, "Keep going fast, you idiot!" The driver quickly pushed up the lever, and, alarmingly, the train began to regain its speed. He glanced at Bond and commented flatly, "There's a girl on the line. I guess it must be some friend of the boss." Bond leant out and looked more carefully. Yes, it was a woman with golden blonde hair. Bond heard Scaramanga's voice shouting from the brake van.
"Hey, guys, it's a surprise for you all. Something from the good old Western films. There's a girl tied across the line, and you know what? It's the girlfriend of a certain man we've been hearing of, called James Bond. Would you believe it? And her name's Goodnight. Mary Goodnight. If only that man Bond were on the train now, I imagine we'd be hearing him cry out to save her."
Chapter 14. The Swamplands. James Bond threw himself towards the accelerator lever and pushed it down with all his strength. The engine lost some of its power, but there were only 100 meters between the train and the girl. The only thing that could save the girl was if Scaramanga used the brakes in the last van. She was going to die. Bond, knowing that Scaramanga would expect him to come out from the right side of the engine, jumped to the left. Hendricks had his gun out, but before he could turn, Bond shot a bullet straight between the man's cold eyes. The head was knocked back, and his body fell to one side. Scaramanga's golden gun fired 2 shots. A bullet crashed into the cabin of the engine. The second struck the driver, who fell to the ground, screaming. There were only 50 meters of track left. The golden hair was blowing over the face, and Bond could clearly see the rope tied around the ankles and wrists. Bond shut his mind to the dreadful crash that would come any moment now. He leant out of the left side of the cabin again and fired 3 more shots. He thought 2 of them had found their targets, but then he felt a great blow to his shoulder, which knocked him to the floor of the cabin, his head hanging out of the train. And it was from there, only a couple of meters away, that he saw the front wheels of the engine crash through the body on the line. He saw the blonde head cut from the body, saw the blue glass eyes give him a last empty stare, saw the pieces of the shop window dummy break into bits with a sharp cracking of plastic and fall into the grass beside the track. James Bond, relieved that it had not been Mary on the track, but feeling sick and shocked, struggled to get to his feet. He reached for the accelerator lever and pushed it upwards as far as it would go. He thought that a gun battle against 5 men on a stationary train would be difficult for him, but he would have a better chance of survival on a fast, moving train. He hardly felt the pain in his shoulder. He looked out of the right-hand side of the engine. 4 guns boomed. Bond threw himself back under cover, but he had just had time to see a glorious sight. In the brake van, Scaramanga had slid from the large chair and was down on his knees, looking as though he was in pain. Bond's bullet had hit him. It was very good news. But there were still 4 armed men remaining. Then a voice from the back of the train. Felix Leiter's voice called out, "Okay, you 4 guys, throw your guns over the side. Now! Quick!" There came the boom of a shot. "I said, quick!" "There! Mr. Ganjarella is dead. Do the rest of you want to go the same way? Okay, then. That's better. And now, put your hands behind your heads. Right. Okay, James, the battle's over. Are you okay? Show yourself." Bond rose carefully. He could hardly believe it. Leiter must have been riding secretly on the buffers behind the brake van. He would not have been able to show himself earlier for fear of Bond's gunfire. Yes, it was definitely Leiter. He was standing beside the now fallen body of Scaramanga and pointing his pistol at the 3 surviving men in the carriage. Bond's shoulder had really begun to hurt now. He shouted, with the anger of huge relief, "Thanks a lot, Leiter. Why on earth didn't you show up before? I could have been hurt." Leiter laughed. "That'll be the day. Now listen, get ready to jump. I'm going to stay with these guys for a while and hand them over to the police in Green Island Harbor." At this point, he shook his head silently to show Bond that these words were actually a lie. "It's swampland, so you'll have a soft landing. It stinks a bit, but don't worry. We'll give you some aftershave when you get home. All right?" Bond looked ahead down the line. In the distance he could see the metal structure of the Orange River Bridge. He looked back into the carriage. He could see the dead body of Hendricks rolling from side to side on the bench. In the seat behind Hendricks, Gengerella also lay dead. Next to him and behind him, the other 3 gangsters looked terrified. They had not expected all this. They were in serious trouble, and they knew it. Bond gave these cold men, who had been prepared to murder him, one last look before he got down onto the steps of the cabin, ready to jump. He chose his moment and threw himself clear of the train and into the soft, wet mass of the stinking mangrove swamp. As he fell, a bird gave a loud screech and flew up and away. The stink was unbearable. He raised his head in time to see Leiter, some 200 meters away, throw himself off the brake van. He seemed to land clumsily and did not get up. And now, within only a few meters of the long metal bridge, another man jumped from the train. It was a tall figure, wearing a white jacket. There was no doubt about it. It was Scaramanga. Why on earth had Leiter left the train without putting a finishing bullet through the man's head? The fight was not over yet. Bond watched as the track began to take the steam train across the bridge. He wondered what would happen to those 3 men. Perhaps the train would run out of steam, and they would run away to the hills. Or could they get the train under control and go on to Green Island Harbour and try and take the motorboat over to Cuba? Immediately, the answer came. Halfway across the bridge, the engine suddenly rose up into the air. At the same time, there came a crash of thunder and a huge sheet of flames before the bridge started to collapse. Bond watched as the bridge folded in on itself and the train crashed down into the river. A terrible silence fell. A bird then began to sing, and 2 butterflies lazily flew past Bond where he lay. His shoulder was causing him a great deal of pain, but he got slowly to his feet, pulled himself out of the wet mud, and began walking up the track towards the bridge. Leiter lay in the stinking swamp. His left leg was at a hideous angle. Bond knew that it was badly broken. He knelt down by the man and said softly, "I can't do much for you now. I'll give you a bullet to bite on for the pain, and get you into some shade. There'll be people coming soon. I've got to follow Scaramanga. He's somewhere up there by the bridge." "What made you think he was dead?" Leiter groaned, more with anger with himself than from the pain.
"There was blood all over the place, and I thought that if he wasn't dead already, the bridge would put an end to him."
He gave Bond a weak smile.
"Did you like what I'd planned for the bridge? Did it get rid of the train okay?"
Bond smiled in return. "It was a fabulous fireworks display. The crocodiles will be sitting down to their dinner right now."
"But that shop dummy, that gave me a real shock. Did you put it on the track?" "Ah, yes, sorry about that, James. I had no idea your girlfriend was blonde, or that you'd believe it was her. Mr. S. told me to tie the thing to the track, and as I'm supposed to be the assistant manager, I couldn't refuse. But it gave me the excuse I needed to get the explosives under the bridge this morning."
"Stupid of me, I suppose," admitted Bond. "I thought he'd caught her last night. Anyway, come on, here, bite on this bullet. This is going to hurt, but I must get you under cover and out of the sun." Bond put his hands under Leiter's armpits and dragged him, as carefully as he could, to a dry patch under a big mangrove bush. Leiter gave a groan as he fainted from the pain. Bond looked thoughtfully down at him. Fainting was probably the best thing that could happen to him right now. He took Leiter's gun out of his waistband and put it beside his left, and only, hand. Bond was still in a lot of danger. If he ended up dead, then Scaramanga would certainly make Felix his second target. Bond started to creep along the line of mangrove bushes towards the bridge. It was early afternoon now, and the sun was high. He was hungry and very thirsty, and his shoulder wound was hurting as he moved. He struggled to remain focused on what he had to do. About 100 meters lay between him and the bridge. He covered another 20 by walking near the track, then moved sideways into the mangroves. He found that if he kept close to the roots of the bushes, he could move fairly easily and silently. His ears were alert, like an animal, ready to hear the smallest sound. Bond guessed that he had gone about 200 meters into the swamp when he heard a single, controlled cough. Chapter 15. The End of the Road. The cough sounded as though it was about 20 meters away towards the river. Bond dropped to one knee, listening intently, looking all around. He waited for 5 minutes without moving. When the cough was not repeated, he crept forward on his hands and knees, his gun gripped between his teeth. In a small clearing of dried, cracked mud, he saw the man. Bond stopped in his tracks, trying to calm his breathing. Scaramanga was lying stretched out, his back resting against a large mangrove root. His hat had gone, and the whole of the right side of his white suit was dark with blood, yet the man's eyes were still very much alive. They swept the clearing every few seconds, looking for any signs of movement in the swamp. His hands rested on the roots beside him, Bond noticed, and there was no sign of a gun. After a while, Scaramanga very carefully coughed again and spat into his hand. He examined the bright pink results and threw them down onto the ground. The cough did not seem to hurt him or cause him much effort. Bond guessed that his bullet had hit Scaramanga in the right side of his chest and had just missed a lung. There was bleeding, but the blood-soaked jacket was not telling the whole truth. In Bond's opinion, Mr. Scaramanga was still very much alive and dangerous. Bond was grateful that he was wearing a dark-coloured suit. He was well camouflaged, and Scaramanga had not seen him. He got quietly up from his knees, put the gun in his right hand, and, keeping his gaze firmly on Scaramanga, he strolled slowly out into the clearing. The other man barely looked up, but said,
"You've taken your time getting here."
He nodded his head towards the gun, and added,
"You're not frightened of a dying man, are you? You Brits are pretty cowardly."
Bond ignored the comment and walked a little closer. "Have you got any more weapons on you? Open your jacket. Slowly, no quick movements. Show me your belt. Now your armpits. And your trouser legs." As Scaramanga moved his trouser leg, Bond caught sight of a shining blade. "Right. Just throw that knife gently into the trees. Gently, very gently." Scaramanga took the knife and, with a flick of the wrist, threw the knife upwards. The silver blade went spinning like a wheel through the sunshine. Bond had to step aside, and the knife landed, blade downwards, in the mud, exactly where Bond had been standing. Scaramanga gave a cold laugh. Then the laugh turned into a cough, and his face twisted with the terrible pain of it. Or was he faking it? Then he relaxed again. "Now then," began Bond. "Let's talk. You've killed too many of my friends. I have the license to kill you, and that's what I am going to do. But I'll make it quick. Not like Margeson. Do you remember him? You were stupid enough to boast about killing him to your friends in Cuba, and we heard about it." Bond paused, and then asked, "As a matter of interest, how many men have you killed in your life?"
"With you, it'll be exactly 50, replied Scaramanga.
He looked up at Bond and said,
"You won't get any secrets out of me, if that's what you're trying to do. I've been shot at by all kinds of experts, and I'm still alive. I've never heard of a Brit who's got the guts to shoot a wounded, defenseless man. I bet we'll just sit here chatting until the rescue team get here. Then I'll be glad to go to court. What will they get me for, anyway?"
"Well, just for a start, there's that nice Mr. Rotkopf with one of your famous gold and silver bullets in him, in the river at the back of your hotel."
"That matches the nice Mr. Hendricks, with one of your bullets somewhere in him. Maybe we'll spend a bit of time in prison together. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? And anyway, who says I killed Rotkopf?"
Scaramanga asked. "It seems you've made quite a few mistakes recently, Mr. Scaramanga. You hired all the wrong security men. Both of your managers were from the CIA. They bugged all of your phones and your conference room. The recording of the gunshot and the conversation about getting rid of Rotkopf's body will be on its way to the CIA headquarters by now. The recordings also include you admitting to the murder of one of our best agents, Ross, of course. See what I mean? There's no way out."
"Okay, Mr. Secret Agent, mistakes seem to have been made. So then, take $1 million. Let me go, and let's call it a deal," offered Scaramanga.
"I don't think so," refused Bond, as he prepared himself to take the other man's life. "This is the end of the road for you." He forced himself to think of the people that this man had killed, of the people he would go on to kill in the future if Bond weakened. This man was the most dangerous, cruel, and efficient one-man killer in the world. Bond had been instructed to kill him. He must kill him, lying down wounded or in any other position. Although nervous, Bond tried to appear casual. "Any messages for anyone, Scaramanga? Anyone you want looking after? I'll take care of it, if it's personal. I'll keep that information to myself." Scaramanga laughed his cold laugh, but carefully.
"What an English gentleman you are."
A few long moments passed without either man speaking. Scaramanga lay breathing steadily against the mangrove root. Bond stood with sweat dripping from his face, and his gun pointing at the man. Then Scaramanga held up a hand. For the first time his face showed emotion, and he spoke softly.
"Just let me say one last prayer, okay? It won't take long, and then you can fire your bullets."
James Bond lowered his gun. He decided that he would give the man a few minutes, but no longer.
"Go ahead,"
he uttered in a tired voice.
1 minute only."
Scaramanga's hand came up and covered his face. There came murmurings in Latin, which seemed to go on for a long time. Bond stood there in the sunshine, his gun lowered, watching Scaramanga, but at the same time not really watching him. The pain in his shoulder, the heat, his thirst, and the thought of what he was about to do, all began to distract him. The fingers of Scaramanga's right hand crawled ever so slowly sideways across his face, centimetre by centimetre. They got to his ear and stopped. The murmuring of the prayer carried on exactly as before. And then the hand leapt behind the head, and a tiny golden handgun fired loudly. Bond spun round as if he had taken a punch to the right side of his face, and then he crashed to the ground. At once Scaramanga was on his feet and was moving forward quickly like a cat. He grabbed the knife he had thrown away earlier and held it in front of him in a threatening way. Bond was twisting on the ground like a dying animal, and the gun in his hand cracked loudly again and again, 5 times. Then the gun fell sideways onto the black earth as his handgun went to the right side of his body and stayed there, grabbing at the terrible pain there. The big man stood for a moment and looked up at the deep blue sky. His fingers opened suddenly and let go of the knife. His heart, shot through by a bullet, stopped beating, and he crashed backwards. Now he lay unmoving, his arms out wide to the sides, as if someone had thrown him away. Chapter 16. The Case Ends. A week later, James Bond slowly opened his eyes. He was confused and anxious, and did not know where he was. He opened his mouth to scream, but only a low groan came out. The nurse at the end of the bed stood up at once and went to his side, and put a cool hand on his forehead. Bond looked up at her with unfocused eyes, and muttered, "You're pretty," before closing his eyes again. Half an hour later, a young doctor stood outside the door to Bond's hospital room in Kingston, explaining to the head nurse what he had found. "He's going to be all right. His temperature is down now. His pulse is a little fast, though that may have been a result of his waking up. I'll come back later to check his wounds. He is likely to wake up again. If he does, and he asks for something to drink, give him fruit juice. He should be on soft food soon. It's a miracle, really. The bullet just hit muscle, and didn't even touch a kidney. But that bullet was dipped in enough poison to kill a horse. Thank goodness that doctor in Savannah Lamar recognized the symptoms of snake venom, and gave him those powerful anti-snake bite injections. He saved the man's life. Now then, there should be no visitors, of course. I'll tell the police and the High Commissioner's office that he's recovering. I don't know who this Mr. Bond is, but apparently London keep calling us about him. He's something to do with the Ministry of Defence." He paused. "By the way, how's his friend getting on in room 12? Mr. Leiter, isn't it? The one the American ambassador and Washington have been calling about. He keeps on asking to see this Mr. Bond." "He's broken his leg in several places," replied the nurse. "He's doing fine, and should be walking with a stick in 10 days. He's already seen the police. I suppose it's all connected with that story in the papers about those American tourists being killed when the bridge collapsed near Green Island Harbor. The police commissioner is handling the case himself." 10 days later, the small hospital room was crowded with people. Bond, who was being supported by a pile of pillows, was amused by the number of official people who had been brought to his bedside. On his left was the Commissioner of Police, who was wearing full uniform, complete with a row of very impressive-looking medals. On his right was a judge of the Supreme Court, who was also very formally dressed, and was accompanied by a clerk. Among the rest, a huge man, to whom Felix Leiter, on crutches, was quite respectful, had been introduced to Bond as Colonel Bannister from Washington. Mary Goodnight was also there, and had been asked to take notes of the meeting. She had also been asked by the nurse to watch for any signs of tiredness or discomfort in James Bond, and had been given the authority to end the meeting if she felt it necessary. But James Bond did not feel tired. He was delighted to see all these people, and to know at last that he was very much alive. The only thing that concerned him was that he and Leiter had not been able to see each other and agree their stories before this meeting. They had carried out this dangerous mission without the knowledge of the Jamaican authorities. A couple of years ago, when Jamaica had still been under British rule, that would have been fine. But now, Bond knew, things were different. They had been wrong not to keep the police commissioner informed. The police commissioner straightened himself and began to speak in a formal tone.
Commander Bond, our meeting here today is being held on the Prime Minister's instructions and with your doctor's approval. There are many rumors going around the island, and we are keen to understand exactly what happened so that justice can be carried out. So, this meeting takes the form of a judicial inquiry. I will outline the facts of the case. Mary Goodnight will take notes, and then a formal document will be prepared. We very much hope that, if the conclusions of the meeting are satisfactory, the case will be closed. Do you understand?
Yes, said Bond, who did not understand.
Now, the Commissioner said in a serious tone, the facts we know are as follows. There recently took place at the Thunderbird Hotel a meeting of what can only be described as foreign gangsters of the worst kind, including representatives of the Soviet Secret Service, the Mafia, and the Cuban Secret Police. They met to discuss the sabotage of the Jamaican sugarcane and aluminium industries, among other related things. Am I correct, Commander?
Yes, agreed Bond quickly. At least this part was true.
Now,
the Commissioner spoke in an even more serious tone.
Knowledge of this meeting came to the attention of the Criminal Investigation Department of the Jamaican Police. Secret conversations then took place between the Jamaican authorities, the Ministry of Defense in Britain, and the Central Intelligence Agency in the United States. As a result of these conversations, you, Mr. Nicholson, and Mr. Leiter were sent to help us to uncover these secret plans against Jamaica.
As the man spoke, Bond noticed that Leiter was nodding his head enthusiastically and looking directly into Bond's eyes. Bond smiled. Leiter was clearly trying to tell him that they should both agree with these comments, which were not true. They both knew that there had never been any contact with the Jamaican authorities.
Working very closely with the Jamaican authorities, the Commissioner went on, Mr. Bond, Mr. Nicholson, and Mr. Leiter carried out their duties with professionalism. They uncovered the true intentions of the gangsters. But, unfortunately, during their mission, at least one of their identities was discovered, and a battle then took place. During the battle, the following enemy agents, the finished report will include a list here, were killed thanks to the skillful gunfire of Commander Bond and Mr. Leiter. And the following enemy agents, there will be another list here, were killed by Mr. Leiter's use of explosives on Orange River Bridge. Unfortunately, Commander Bond and Mr. Leiter received severe wounds, from which they are now recovering in the Kingston Memorial Hospital. Finally, it must be noted that Constable Percival Sampson of the Negril Constabulary was the first to discover the wounded Felix Leiter, who then directed Constable Sampson to the scene of the final fight. On the instructions of the Prime Minister, Sir Alexander Bustamante, a judicial inquiry was held today at the bedside of Commander Bond, with Felix Leiter present, to confirm the above facts. These facts, in the presence of Justice Maurice Cargill of the Supreme Court, are here and now confirmed. The Commissioner was obviously pleased with how the formalities had gone. He smiled broadly at Bond. "There's just one more thing," he added, as he handed Bond a sealed packet, another similar one to Felix, and a third to Colonel Bannister. "I present now to Commander James Bond of Great Britain, Mr. Felix Leiter of the United States, and, in his absence, Mr. Nicholas Nicholson of the United States, the award of the Jamaican Police Medal for gallant and meritorious services to the independent state of Jamaica." Those watching began to clap in recognition of the men's bravery, and James Bond and Felix Leiter muttered a few words of thanks. Justice Cargill rose to his feet, and in a serious tone asked Bond and Leiter in turn, "Is this a true and correct account of what happened?" "Yes, indeed it is," said Bond. "Yes, it is, Your Honour," agreed Leiter enthusiastically. "In that case," Justice Cargill announced formally, "I declare this inquiry closed." He then turned to Mary Goodnight. "Please could you ask everyone here to sign this document, and then have it delivered to my office? Thank you so much." "Certainly, Your Honour," replied Mary Goodnight, and then she glanced at Bond. "But now, if you don't mind, I think Mr. Bond needs to rest." Slowly, everyone stood up and left the room. Everyone, that is, apart from Leiter, who waited until he was alone with Bond, and then moved closer to his bedside. "Well, James, that was the easiest inquiry I've ever attended," exclaimed Leiter. "I lied my head off, but we've come out of it looking good, and we've even been given an award." Bond's wounds were beginning to hurt, and he felt exhausted. He smiled, trying to hide the pain. Leiter was going to leave Jamaica that afternoon, but Bond did not want to say goodbye. Bond treasured his good friends, and Felix and he had shared a lot of important things over the years. Bond said, "Scaramanga was quite a guy. If only we could have caught him alive." "What? And make a hero out of him? I don't think so. In my book, an enemy's an enemy. You did the right thing killing that man. You did a good job, so don't you worry about it." Leiter limped towards the door and opened it. He raised his hand briefly. The two men had never shaken hands in their lives. His final words were, "And keep away from me for a few weeks. Every time I see you, a piece of me gets broken off. I don't like the idea of myself as the vanishing man." He smiled and left the room.
Chapter 17. Mary Goodnight. Just over a week later, James Bond was sitting up in a chair, reading a book, and wondering when he was going to be able to leave the hospital. He was feeling much better. And although the nurses were fabulous, especially the pretty one who had been with him when he had woken up, he had had enough of the place. He glanced at his watch. 4 o'clock. It was visiting time, and Mary Goodnight would be there any minute. Although he knew it was not fair, he was looking forward to complaining at length to her about his situation. Mary Goodnight came through the door. Despite the Jamaican heat, she was looking as fresh as a rose. Under her arm, she was carrying a medium-sized, official-looking envelope with an elaborate wax seal on it. Bond gave one-word answers to her questions about his health, and then demanded, "What's in that envelope?" "It's a top-secret message for you from M," she said excitedly. "Open it for me," ordered Bond. Mary Goodnight looked shocked. "But I'm not allowed to." Bond gave her a look which told her that today was not a day to argue with him. She carefully opened the envelope, pulled out the thick sheet of paper, and began to read. "Top secret to 007 from M. I have received your report and the report from our partners. You have done well and carried out an exceptionally difficult and dangerous mission to my total satisfaction. I trust you are in good health. Please inform me when you will be reporting for your next mission." "In good health?" interrupted Bond incredulously. Mary Goodnight looked up and smiled delightedly. "I've never known him to be so complimentary. Have you, James? It's wonderful." She looked hopefully at James, yet his face remained expressionless. She looked down and began to read the message again. "Oh, James!" she exploded with excitement.
"Don't tell me," commented Bond in a voice heavy with sarcasm. "He's going to give me free lunch vouchers every second Friday, and a new suit to replace the one that I've carelessly allowed to get damaged."
But secretly, what Mary had read out had delighted him, and he very much wanted to know what was in the rest of the message. "James, please stop interrupting and don't look so miserable," said Mary Goodnight. Bond allowed a smile to creep onto his face. He liked the fact that she could get so excited on his behalf. As he watched her concentrating on the letter, Bond thought that she was someone he would always want to have near him. But as what? As his secretary? As his girlfriend? Mary Goodnight looked up at him, and the question, as it had done for weeks, remained without an answer.
"All right, Mary. Go on," Bond finally said.
Mary Goodnight's face became serious. "Now, just listen to this," she told him, and then began to read the remaining part of the message. "In view of the outstanding quality of the services mentioned above, the Prime Minister plans to recommend to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth that she immediately grant you a knighthood. This would be in addition to the KCMG that you already hold. As is usual, I am writing now to accept this high honour before Her Majesty puts her seal upon it. You should first send telegraphed confirmation of acceptance, and then follow this with a formal written letter. I am, of course, in full agreement with this award, and send you my personal congratulations." Of course, James Bond was pleased. Above all, he was pleased that M had been so complimentary about what he had done. The rest of the message was not important to him. He was not interested in medals, or being able to write special letters after his name. He had never been a public figure, and he did not want to become one now. There was one thing he treasured above everything else, and that was his privacy. So now James Bond said to Mary Goodnight, avoiding her eyes, "Write down what I am about to say, and send it in a telegram tonight. All right?"
"Yes, of course,"
replied Goodnight with enthusiasm. Bond began. "Top secret. For M's eyes only. Your message has been received and greatly appreciated. Am informed by hospital that I shall be returning to London able to work in 1 month. Regarding the high honour, please ask Her Majesty to allow me to refuse the honour that Her Majesty is kind enough to consider awarding her obedient servant. My main reason for refusing this honour is that I do not want to pay more at hotels and restaurants." Mary Goodnight interrupted Bond, horrified by what he was saying.
"James, it is your decision what you write in the rest of the letter, but you really can't say that last part."
Bond nodded. "If you say so. Let's change the whole of that last sentence to this. I am a Scottish peasant, and will always feel comfortable being a Scottish peasant. And I know, sir, that you will understand my preference. A formal letter will follow." Mary Goodnight closed her notepad with a snap. She looked at Bond angrily.
"Well, really, James, why don't we talk about this tomorrow? You are clearly in a bad mood, and might feel differently in the morning."
"It's just not my sort of thing," Bond told her apologetically. "I just refuse to call myself Sir James Bond. It's ridiculous. And I know M will understand. He thinks much the same way about these things as I do. Anyway, I'm not going to change my mind, so you can telegraph that straight away. And I'll write the letter this evening. Anything else?"
"Well, there is one thing, James," she said more softly. "The head nurse said you can leave hospital at the end of the week, but that you really need to rest somewhere quiet for at least 3 weeks. Have you got any plans for where you might go? You need to be near the hospital."
"I've no idea. What do you suggest?" inquired Bond.
"Well, I've got a little villa up by Monadam."
She spoke more quickly now, her cheeks reddening a little with embarrassment.
"It's got quite a nice spare room, looking out over Kingston Harbour. It's cool up there. You could relax, and I would cook for you."
James Bond looked at Mary for a moment and said, and meant it, "Mary Goodnight, you're an angel." At the same time, he knew, deep down, that love from Mary Goodnight, or from any other woman, was not enough for him. The kind of life he had led, and the things he had seen, had made Bond quite different from most other men. He knew he would always need something more, although he would, perhaps, never know what exactly